Hello, welcome. My name is Yoshi Burton. I'm a Director of Engagement for the UFV Alumni Association. So glad you guys could be here today for our Eco-Advocacy and the Fraser Valley Speakers Panel. As you know, or as you can see, we're filming this, and it'll be live. It'll be on YouTube and online so that people can view it after, and so that the message can get out a little bit further. Today's speaker panel, we're really excited to be partnering with the Science Department at the University of the Fraser Valley to present our distinguished panelists in a really interesting topic that's very pertinent to the Fraser Valley. We're building on our success from previous talks, and this is going to be a 2-per-semester sort of plan that we have rolled out on a variety of topics, with the idea of engaging students with local professionals, experts in industries, so that you can not only learn but network, ask questions, engage with these people who are maybe in the profession that you yourself want to be in. I'm going to introduce Pat Harrison, who is a professor of biology here at the University of the Fraser Valley, and he's going to be the guy that introduces all of our people. I read Pat's bio and I was excited to see that he was a man after my own heart. Pat Harrison, professor here at UFV. He's the chair of the UFV Center for Sustainability. He grew up in Montana. He loved the outdoors. He's always wanted to be a biologist. He received his first degree, a Bachelor of Arts in Zoology, with a wildlife conservation focus, and became a park ranger in 1970, which I always thought would be a really cool job to be a park ranger. As a park ranger in Mount Rainier National Park, he became fascinated by the variety of fungi that flourish in the park. Pat returned to graduate school where he earned a Master's of Arts in Botany, studying the ecology of fungi. After graduate school, Pat taught at UBC for 17 years before joining UFV's biology department in 2003. He authored a book called Illustrated Flora of the University Endowment Lands that was published in 1987. He is highly involved with outdoors communities, serving as the president of the Hike BC and Hike Canada organizations and director of the Federation of Mountain Clubs of BC and Save Our Parklands Association. Pat has been a recipient of many awards related to environmentalism, sustainability, and service. I didn't want to mess up your bio, Pat, so I wrote it all down, make sure we get it all perfect for you. Most recently, Pat was awarded the 2015 UFV Dean of Science Award and the 2015 Outstanding Service Award from the Federation of Mountain Clubs of BC. So he's certainly an environmental advocate, and we're really excited that Pat was willing to be here today and help us present these topics. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Pat, or let Pat come up here and introduce our speakers. So let's just give Pat a roll on.
Okay, everybody hear me? I want to thank everyone for coming out today and getting involved in this. This is the first time we've actually collaborated with the Alumni Association, so I'm excited about that. And so we're delighted to be part of this, and the Alumni Association came to us and said, would we be interested? And we said, of course. So what we've assembled today are 5 fabulous students, or former students, who, and I've worked with all of them or had them in my courses. So we'll start, just go down the order here. This is Sheena Adams, and she came, she's down here from Inuvik right at the moment, and I said, would you mind joining the panel? And she said, of course, she would be happy to. So she's just down here for about a month, and then she's flying back up north again. And she's a former sustainability coordinator here, one of the first facilities had, and so forth. The next one is Alyssa Bougie, who I'm currently working with extensively with the center. She's just done all sorts of things. If you saw the thing on garbage on the green and other energy projects, they're all going to brag about themselves in a minute here. So, Andrea, and she's a person that we call upon frequently to come in and give talks on salamander and turtle research in our ecology courses, and she always gives her time to come out, so we thank Andrea for that. Jillian, former student of mine in mycology, and now heavily into the impact of buildings on environment, so she'll tell you all about that in a minute. And Ahsleigh, who is another environmental sustainability coordinator, as is Alyssa. I forgot to mention that, sorry. So we have 3 environmental sustainability coordinators here on this panel, and Ahsleigh was the one that received the Green Leader Award last year from the Rotary Club, so she did an outstanding job on some of the energy reduction programs that we had here at UFV. So let's go. Big man, they took their time out from their work schedule. We appreciate it. So briefly, on the schedule I had here, introduce the topic of climate change. So I'm not an expert, but I decided I would do a little research. Because as a scientist, that's what you're supposed to do, right? So, personally, I run a blueberry farm, and starting in 2006, my land began to sink about the time all the hot summers arrived. And it continues to sink every year. So I'm on peak in Surrey, and I've lost 60 centimeters of elevation right now. It used to be I couldn't drive my tractor in winter. I'd sink my tractor into the peat bog. I can drive year round now. So things definitely are drying out. So that's an observation. That's what you're supposed to do as a scientist. And then you're supposed to collect data and do some background reading and so forth, and then come up with an experiment. So I haven't decided how I'm going to re-energize my soil yet. So, but definitely, from my perspective, is that we definitely are in a period of climate change. So going back only 200 years ago, just briefly, it was the first observation that there might be climate change from somebody who proposed the glaciers might actually be responsible for moving huge boulders. So that was only in 1815, 1824. A gentleman came up with the idea that the size of the Earth is too far from the Earth from the sun to be warm enough without something special happening. So he came up with a theory that the atmosphere was actually transmitting UV light and visible spectrum light to the surface, and then it was being re-emitted as infrared waves. So, and therefore, the UV light came through very easily, and the infrared, which are longer waves and less energy, were not being transmitted back out. So that was warming up the Earth. And then Louis Agassiz proposed in 1837 that the Earth had been subjected to ice ages and was not part of the biblical flood, which was the current thinking. And not just to prove that you don't have to be a scientist to be observational. There was a guy by the name, in the night he moved along 30 more years, a guy by the name of John Tyndall, who was a mountain climber. And he actually was climbing all over Northern Europe, and he questioned how these ice ages came and went and how they could move so drastically. So he started doing some experiments on his own, and he determined that water vapor, methane, and CO2 actually were the prime components that were trapping heat in the atmosphere. Move another 30 years, and you have a guy by the name of Savant Arrhenius, who discovered that a slight increase in CO2 would increase the heat trapping capability quite a bit. And came up with the current theory that moving the temperature up 1 degree Celsius will actually increase the 7% more vapor can be held in the atmosphere. And of course, that has an impact on trapping heat, right? So he moved that along. But how many of you know the angstrom is kind of out of vogue now, but that was named after Kenneth Angstrom, and he did a bunch of experiments in tubes in vacuum tubes, and he said that Arrhenius was just full of it, and there was no change and so forth, and temperatures wouldn't rise. So Arrhenius claims with his calculations that the Earth was going to warm up 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. So 3 more decades brings you into 1931, where you have a gentleman who's a physicist who then went back and used Arrhenius's data to prove that angstrom was full of it. And this is the way scientists work. You got to always be repeating experiments, and if they're consistent, that's fine. But there's always somebody out there willing to try to disprove you. That's the good thing about science. So, you know, not if they disprove your theory, that's good. But anyway. Then there's a guy by name in 1940, Guy Calendar, here's another case. He's not in academic, but he's a steam engine specialist. So he studied the temperature records. Now, the records started all in 1880, and nobody, I guess, bothered to look at them until 1940. And he decided to actually take that data, that hard data, and he noticed that there was a steady climb in temperature records, and along with that was an increase in CO2 of about 10%. So, and he also cast doubts on the, I guess everybody up to that point thought the ocean would absorb all the excess CO2 that came along. And this gentleman said, no, it can't be, because only the shallow water on top actually mixes with the atmosphere. So, you know, the ocean's not going to absorb as much excess CO2 as you think. So then you move into post-World War II, and the military was interested in something to do with heat-seeking missiles and climate hotspots. So I don't know how that all relates, but out of that came the computer modeling case. So in the 1950s, you got going with computer modeling, which then also showed an increase in temperature of 3 to 4 degrees in the next couple of decades. So there also radioactive carbon dating was utilized, and that's showed that carbon-14, which has a very short half-life, actually was far less of it relative to C12 and C13 because of the increase in coal burning and deforestation. So again, there is some more evidence, as you can see, showing that indeed CO2 levels were going up in the atmosphere. So, and then if you want to move into it, there was a gentleman in California, a guy by the name of Charles David Keeling of California, who said nobody's actually measured how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. So he said he got funding, he set up some stations, one in the Antarctica and one in Hawaii, and he started measuring how much CO2 is in the atmosphere, and that was in the 50s as well. So by 1958, he said, quote, the CO2 level is increasing steadily, and by the year 2000, there may be sufficient CO2 emitted into the atmosphere to have measurable and perhaps marked changes in the climate. So that's back in the 50s. In the 60s, computer models, again, were more sophisticated, and they also backed up the fact that we're going to be increasing the temperature in the next little while. But there were doubters in the 1970s who said, no, it's going to take 4 centuries to rise 2 degrees Celsius. Well, we now know that's not true. And as of this January, we experienced the warmest January on record since 1880, since record keeping started. And then in the 1980s and the 1990s, they started doing drilling of ice cores in Antarctica and Greenland, and they discovered what they were testing was the air pockets in those cores, and the CO2 levels going back 150,000 years and longer showed approximately 200 to 300 parts per million of CO2 in the air, and we're now up to 400 as of March 2015, so we have doubled the amount of CO2 globally. For the first time globally, we have 400 parts per million. So it is a growing concern, of which our panelists are playing a major role. However, I want to emphasize what also is growing is the opposition to the belief of the greenhouse theory. So in 1991, the politicians, I won't mention which ones, founded the Council on the Environment. Sounds very official, doesn't it? And they started trying to dispute the theory of global warming. In 1998, the American Petroleum Institute came up with the Global Climate Science Communication Action Plan. Sounds really good. It was a campaign aimed primarily in response to the Kyoto protocol limiting emissions that was signed off in December of 1997. So, with that, everybody has heard in the news, we're having rising seas, we're having greater storms, bigger wildfires, and extreme weather. So all that is coming probably out of this increase in CO2. So what all this says is we must be diligent about our source of information. We must all question all information as citizens and keep ourselves well informed on that. So I realize that's a very hurried history, but I found it fascinating to kind of get into it and see how it evolved, because it's a science that's basically come out of nowhere in the last couple of years. So anyway, what we're going to do now, without further ado, is we're going to have the panelists, starting with Sheena, do a little bragging. Tell us what they're up to and how it relates to the environment. So Sheena.
Yes, thanks Pat for that. My name is Sheena Adams, and I'm very happy to be back at campus. I really enjoyed my time at UFV, and I feel like I thrived here. Currently, I'm starting my 6th year living in the Nunavut Northwest Territories, which is in the Western Arctic, although I still maintain a home here. And one day, and I have no future plans close, but maybe in my retirement I'll get to come back here. So currently right now I enjoy my time in the Nunavut Northwest Territories. I'm the Regional Energy Project Coordinator for Arctic Energy Alliance. And Arctic Energy Alliance is a nonprofit in the Northwest Territories that's committed to helping the Northwest Territories reduce its greenhouse gas consumption. My role within the AEA is in Nunavut, and I look after the High Arctic and the Western Arctic. I service 7 communities. I spend roughly 4 months of my year for traveling to those communities, and I teach 3 things to the communities or work with them. I teach energy conservation, energy efficiency, and I help them to adopt and install renewable energy. Primarily right now, we're working on solar, but we're also monitoring wind. I'm also working on my master's degree in environmental education and communication, and I'm partway through that, and I'm really enjoying having that to work on and keep my commitment to the environment and keep expanding and helping to make positive changes wherever I can. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Alyssa Bougie, and I'm actually a 4th year bio student, so I'm not technically an alumni. I am also UFV Sustainability Coordinator. Some of you might not have known that we have one of those, but we do in fact. Some of my duties are to take care of UFV's energy reduction campaigns. I also have been working on compost and recycling management, and we have some exciting announcements coming up in the next few weeks, hopefully. I also coordinate with other departments to ensure that they are being as sustainable as possible. One example of that is helping to plan a conference with social work, which was an interesting experience, and we tried to make sure that the conference was as sustainable as possible. So that's just a few of the things that I do on campus, and yeah, if any of you are students and you're interested in getting involved, let me know after.
Hello, my name is Andera Gielens. I'm a wildlife biologist. My current hat is with Wildlife Preservation Canada, which is a national conservation organization working with species at risk across the country. I'm the Western Projects Coordinator, which means I work with all of our projects in Alberta and BC. My main focus is herpetofauna, so working with reptiles and amphibians, mainly Western painted turtles and Oregon spotted frogs here in BC. As well as Taylor's checker spot butterflies, which is new and don't know why I got that this year. So things are always changing. I also am an independent contractor working for myself as part of other organizations, as well as working for government and industry under that hat as well. Thanks.
I'm Jillian, and I work in green building consulting, and most people have absolutely no idea what that is. So the new student union building is built to LEED Gold, right? Does anyone know? Mm-hmm. So what we would do is we would be part of the project team to make sure all the consultants are doing what they have to make sure the building's green. So we work with the mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, the contractor, the architect, just to make sure that that end goal is achieved. And that's what Lighthouse does as a whole. I'm more involved in the construction process, so I deal with contractors, which is a lot of fun. I get to bake a lot of cookies. And I go to site, I do inspections to make sure that their goals and their credits are achieved at the end.
All right, I'm Ashley, and I'm working with a local entrepreneur in Abbotsford. Basically, we're trying to clean tilapia wastewater using an aquatic plant called duckweed, and that wastewater can then go back to the tilapia fish farms. We can use the duckweed itself to feed people. We can use it to make fish feed. And so basically my job right now is running the day-to-day operations, because we are one of the first people at least in Canada, to try and grow duckweed in an indoor environment. So we're basically trying to grow nature indoors.
Okay. So the format today is we have some predetermined questions, and we've gone over them just to warn them what's coming at them, to be honest. So there's no surprises, and we picked out certain questions for certain other panelists here, and then after that we're going to turn it over to you, the audience, to ask our panelists, questions about that you might have for them. So we're going to begin with Alyssa, and this one was, since you are a student still, the question was when you were a student, but she's still a student. Briefly describe your experience as a student at UFV. What were you involved in, and so forth. Go.
So as I mentioned, I'm a bio major, and I'm also minoring in geography. Bio, I'm sort of focusing on ecology and that aspect of it, although medicine is really cool, but I don't care about small details very much, so I don't think that would be a good career choice. While I've been a student at UFV, I've tried to get involved in as many things as possible. So as I mentioned, I kind of volunteered for the social work, and then it was a bit of work as well. I've also volunteered for science fairs on campus and a group called the Garden Club. It's a little bit nerdy, but I like gardening, so there was that. Also environmental groups on campus. Originally it was Students for Sustainability, and now it's transformed a bit into Students for Environmental Advocacy. And that group is still active. They were really instrumental to help out with the waste audit that we did last semester. So I've really enjoyed UFE. We have such small class sizes, so it's really a great place to take advantage of opportunities like internships. And yeah, I guess.
So while you have the microphone in your hand, was there a particular area of education at UFV that you consider to be really valuable?
I would have to say, in the geography department, I had the opportunity to do an internship in India, and while I was over there, I was working on environmental stuff related to urban gardening as well as public health, and that was an amazing opportunity. If any students have the chance to go on one of these internships, there's also internships in Tanzania at the moment, I think. I'd say that was probably the most valuable aspect of my education here.
Thank you very much. Jillian, and also Ashley, the same question.
I studied physical geography at UFV, and with my job I deal a lot with erosion, and I have to write erosion plans for construction sites, and they can't take dirt off their site. I'm pretty ruthless about that. And I did Bachelor Science, so I did some chemistry, and that kind of relates to it, because I have to check to make sure all the paints that they're using and all the adhesives all comply with certain standards. And that's about it.
I also have a physical geography major with Bachelor Science, but I think one of the most important aspects of my education was actually getting my communication certificate. I find communications is very, very important in the workforce, and if you can collect the data really well all you want, but if you can't communicate the data, you might as well just keep it to yourself. And I found doing communications, it's not a large certificate, it's 3 classes, but one of them is oral communication, so you learn how to public speak, which I think is a very important part, especially in sciences.
So, Jillian and Ashley both, how did you come into the current position you were working in?
So as many of you know, graduating is absolutely terrifying. And I had too many ideas of what I wanted to do, because I went through, what do I like? I like composting, I like recycling, I like chemistry, I like geology, I like landslides. And it was just too overwhelming. And so instead of that, I thought, what do I hate? What do I absolutely hate about the world? And then urban sprawl came into my head. And that makes me very mad. So I'm like, what can I do with that? And then a week before I wrote my final, I came across the green building industry. And after my final, I moved to Edmonton. and I got a job in a construction company doing green building, and I'm still doing it.
Mine's a totally different story. I was just applying for jobs after I graduated and was kind of not getting anywhere. But through UFV, I was volunteering with a geography professor, Stephen Marsh, and I was doing water sampling. And I'd done that for about 3 years with him. So I still kept in contact, and he knew I was looking for a job, and someone he had known, my boss, contacted him saying, I need someone to work for me. And then he contacted me about the job, and then I contacted my boss, and now I'm still working for him.
So the message is networking is really
Talk
important.
to your teachers.
Teachers at UFV are amazing. Get to know them.
Yeah, get to know your teachers.
So this is the question 5 was what about the industry you're currently working in intrigues you the most? And that was all 5 said they wanted to participate in that. So. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll start here at this end of the table. So working up in the Arctic, I've always really valued community and I've really valued the environment. So being up north working intrigues me because the communities that I service are called thermal communities, which mean all of the energy that they use is produced using diesel. So when I can go in and set up a solar or educate about conservation and efficiency, I know that we're making a difference in the greenhouse gas, and I know that we're making a big difference. And I think in addition to that, I find my work up there intriguing because not only are we helping to reduce greenhouse gas, but we're helping the communities to become more independent and more secure. And that goes back to the 2 important things to me, which are the environment and community.
I'd have to say that would be similar for me as well. I think right now is a defining moment in human history, and I think it's really remarkable that we have the chance to work and possibly solve some of the world's biggest problems that humans have ever seen anyways. So I guess that would be what I find intriguing.
One of the things that I enjoy the most about my job, and on days it's also the thing I dislike most about my job, is having to deal and getting to deal with a variety of different stakeholders, and often how much they will surprise you both in what they are tolerant of, and at the same time the people that you think would be most tolerant of green issues that really aren't. So often trying to not be blindsided by the changing of people's views and having them not be exactly what you think they would be.
My favorite portion of my job is construction. When most people think of green building, they think of energy efficiency. You have to have a good envelope and good windows and then you're set. But there's actually a lot more to it than that. That's just a minor part of it. So I'm more intrigued with the construction process of it, diverting waste during the construction process, choosing the right materials, making sure they're local and have recycled content in them. And part of that is when I did geography, we always did field trips. And so I love being outside and on site, and my steel-toe boots are really comfortable.
Yeah, I love where the potential of this job can go. If we are able to solve growing duckweed indoors, we have the potential to feed people, because people can actually eat duckweed. So this kind of solves the hunger issue of the world. It helps the agricultural sector in terms of them able to reuse the water that we clean, and to use the duckweed itself for, it can be used for fish feed, and I think cows can eat it as well. So that part really intrigues, that like the potential for it is really awesome. That's what I have to say.
Okay, Sheena and Jillian, what does an ideal entry-level candidate look like in your industry, and how would you advise that they go about entering that particular role? So I've got a lot of potential candidates out there.
Yeah, certainly. And you know, I'm a big advocate for people going into the renewable energy sector right now. I see that there is a lot of potential and growth, and so I would encourage anyone who's interested to follow that path. An entry-level candidate in the industry, if as a regional energy project coordinator in an Arctic Energy Alliance, when there's hiring, generally it's entry level is a degree focused either in science, communications, project management, or engineering. However, I also think that there is room within this industry, there's for anyone with any degree, but to follow maybe a little bit of a trade and do some certification in solar installation or alternative energy installation. And there are smaller courses out there that you can take, maybe do it for the summer, get a summer job, finish your degree, and you'll be 3 steps ahead of where I was. So I think all of those things are where you need to be for entry level.
For my industry, you have to be passionate. I got my first job, I didn't even know what a green building was. I just knew that's what I wanted to do, and I was gonna get it, and I wasn't gonna settle for it. So you have to be eager and passionate, and you can basically do whatever you want.
Okay. Ashley, what can be done to make the transition between studies and a career smoother and simpler?
Well, like I said before, I definitely think talk to your teachers, get to know your teachers. They have research and they always need students to help with their research, and then you become, not friends, but like you get to know your teacher, and they know once you graduate that you're obviously looking for a job, and they have access to people that they know in different industries. And then if they happen to look for a job or happen to look for someone who needs to work for them, then obviously they can contact you. That's how I got my job.
Okay, next question is, if you had to suggest further education, whether that be graduate school or industry certifications, or just jumping into the workforce, what would you suggest and why? Sheena?
I looked at that question after I signed up for it. I thought that's actually a very difficult question.
Yes.
But I think it is definitely a personal preference. For myself, I graduated in 2011 from UFV. I had plans to go on to a master's degree. I was thinking about genetic counseling. I wasn't really sure. I took some time out. I went back to the workforce because, like most people, when you graduate, it's good to get a job right after. And I'm really, really glad I took that time and that experience to take those few years. I didn't go back I decided on a master's 5 years after, and I'm doing it while I'm working, and that's going quite well. And when I'm done my master's, I've decided that I'd like to learn 2 languages and continue on with some other education. So I think it is a personal preference, but I think it's always important to keep learning. If that's what interests you. If you can learn while you're working, you'll really, for me, that's the way to do it.
Jillian?
Even though I started my first job with no knowledge of anything, I did have to get certifications after. I do have my lead accredited professional, which just means with the lead project, I know what's going on, and I can inform the consultants what they have to do. I also have my certified inspector erosion and sedimentation control, so I can just write the erosion plans for all the sites and go and inspect them and sign off on them.
Okay, a couple more general questions and then we'll get into the heart of this stuff here. Alyssa's going to talk about the mentorship being a critical area for development, not only when you graduate from university, but throughout your whole career. How would you recommend that students seek and acquire a mentorship relationship?
So mentorship is definitely very important. For me, I was able to get mentors through my internship in India. Gary Fair, who's now the chair of the Agricultural Center of Excellence, is a wonderful resource if you're interested in sustainable food systems or forestry or anything like that. I'd also recommend directed studies. I never did one personally, but I've heard from tons of students that directed studies were some of their favorite classes that they did, and their professors are still very connected to them. Other ways are just volunteering throughout the campus. You can often find good people who will network for you, and any opportunities that come up that even sound remotely interesting, I'd say take it.
Okay. Andrea?
Thank you. So before I even started university, I did a pre-university co-op. I did that with an organization in the Fraser Valley that studied pest management and crops, which is not at all what I was interested in, but I didn't have a driver's license, so that was closest to me. So logistically, that's where I ended up. But there I met a professor who was doing her bachelor's at the time, Vicki Marlett, who was a former professor here at UFV and is now at SFU. I met her and she became a mentor of mine. Even though she's eco-toxicologist and I do not do chemistry very well, she was very passionate and she was well connected and became a very good friend. So that really helped me a lot. Then from UFV, I did a directed studies. I studied African wild dogs and their pack dynamic. And through that, I met a very interesting woman who studied African wild dogs. She has no academic background, but she was very passionate, and she put me towards another non-for-profit. Through that organization, I worked throughout Europe, working on endangered species programs and reintroduction programs through captive breeding. And then through there, I came back to Vancouver, and now I'm working with the species I'm working at here through a branch of that same organization. So from before I was even in university, the mentorships and the people that I've been able to meet have really connected me to where I've ended up. And I don't know how I would have ended up doing what I'm doing now if any of those links weren't there. So throughout everything, I've been able to connect and be able to make kind of the career that I was looking for that I didn't even know I was looking for at the time. So it worked out well.
Great. Well, while you got the mic,
Yeah.
the next question you volunteered for is, what kind of skills did you have to learn on the fly after leaving university and entering the workforce?
All the ones that I don't want. So stats. If any of you have used this horrible program called R, it's both the most amazing thing and the bane of your existence. So that I had to learn on my own to do my master's, which was incredibly painful. I learned GIS software just recently. That was something that, because as a wildlife biologist, all your animals go to sleep in the winter, so it leaves a little nice open gap for you to take on other work. So I learned GIS, which is more applicable to both biology but to other industries as well, so that really helped. You really have to learn. For my job, biology is 90% arts and crafts. So I know how to build stuff now. I know how to fix my car when it breaks down in the middle of nowhere. So all these types of things you have to learn on the fly, and that really makes you more valuable as an employee.
Thank you. Sheena, you have an interesting tale, I believe.
Well, one of the skills I had to learn was how to be comfortable flying. So I learned that on the fly. I had to get over that one pretty quick. Flying around, sometimes many times a week. And I had to learn for myself how to go into a community and be there for 10 to 14 days on my own, without my friends and my support, and be with myself while I worked on projects, and to be comfortable with that. And, help is not always close by, and sometimes you get stormed in, and sometimes you're there and you're without your friends and your dog and your things that keep you going. So I've really had to learn that. I've had to learn about solar and all of the parts of that, and learn about how kilowatt hours get put into the inverter. And I've had to learn a lot about policy within the government and the utility boards. Those were all new to me, and I also had to learn about my master's, which is it's a hard process, but I think it's important to continue on with it. That's what I've had to learn. And I've had to learn about the Arctic. I'm working in a cross-cultural environment that is sometimes in the winter cold and dark, and learning to be in that environment and function and take care of myself and those around me.
Great. Thank you. The last general question is, what is the one thing new graduates can keep in mind to flourish in the workforce today? Now, I'll just throw that, I don't have any names by that. Who wants to take that one?
I'll start that one.
All right.
My main thing is most jobs are not posted. That's the biggest thing I've learned. Both the real adult jobs I've had have never been posted. They just saw my resume and said, hey, we could use a new person. So keep that in mind, please.
Anyone else want to contribute to that?
I wrote down two things. As a new graduate, to flourish in the workforce today, show up to something that you really enjoy doing. If you like it a little bit, keep going, find out what you really love about it, and expand into that. And eventually, you'll find what really gets you going, and when you go to work, it won't be like going to work, it'll be like just going to some place you really enjoy, like a park Like, I feel very fortunate. It's taken me a few years to find a job that I really love, that first of all, I enjoy going to, but it helps support what I believe in. And every day when I go to work, well, almost every day, there might be the odd time I'm a little bit tired, but I really love my job and I love going to work. But it took me time to find that. And when you find it, it's amazing.
Okay. So that brings us down to the main topic that we're going to ask all 5 panelists to answer. And that is the hot topic in environmental news today when you open the paper is, of course, climate change. And so the question that really is, how has climate change impacted the industry in which you are working? And how would you help your industry to cope with the impacts of this climate change? So what involvement can you do to help solve the issue? So well, I guess we'll just go right on down the line here, starting with poor Sheena, I think first.
Thank you. Well, the answer to this one's fairly easy. I mean, climate change drives my industry. Especially in the Arctic, the climate change and people looking for security and independence and a lower cost and a cleaner cost of producing electricity makes my job very busy. And I see that, even our organization, we've grown. I've been working with them for 2 years. We've grown from, I think, 18 people to 22. So and every time you hear climate change on the news, we know that, there's more work for us to do out there. And for me, what I'm really trying to focus on now is to help encourage people, like I said earlier, to go into the industry and get training so that we can build up the capacity and we can increase, within Canada and within the Arctic, the ability to keep expanding so that we can keep moving forward to help reduce climate change through the adoption of renewable energy and energy conservation and energy efficiency.
For me, it's kind of the same. Climate change is really the reason that I have the industry that I'm working in. From a sustainability perspective, but from an ecology perspective, climate change is not a good thing. And at this point in my career, I'm still trying to figure out the best way that I can go about solving some of the issues we're facing, whether that looks like a geography master's or whether that means volunteering internationally or staying here. I'm still not sure.
So looking at the issue specifically of climate change, when we're looking at species at risk here in the Fraser Valley, when we do extinction modeling, so looking at the percentage and rate and areas of extinction for species at risk in the Pacific Northwest area, all the species that we're looking at, when we extinction model them with climate change as a factor, all the species end up as the most likely survival in species richness here in the Fraser Valley. So historically, and where we're currently standing for a lot of the species at risk we see here in BC, we are on the very periphery of their range. The very northern end of most of the species ranges are here in the Fraser Valley. What is going to happen and what they're predicting is going to happen is that all these species risk, we will end up as a refugia for these species. Which means that all of our habitats here are critical, as well as habitats that are just beyond the border of where most of these species are surviving right now. So just a little bit north of us, kind of up into Hope and Boston Bar area. So for me, what that looks like is really trying to conserve these areas. So we're looking at areas right now in parks, they're really human impacted. Those are going to be our refugia in the future, and they're not even doing that great right now. So looking towards those specific habitats and what species are going to need those habitats, both that are there now and the ones that are going to need those habitats in the future. Specifically for me, what's impacting me this month is everything is waking up, and I'm seeing the direct animal impacts of a really wimpy winter. So I deal with a lot of animals that go into hibernation, and we like to think that, from our perspective as a mammal, for amphibians and reptiles, we would think, well, it's been an easier winter for us, so it must have been an easier winter for them. but the exact opposite is true. These animals need a deep hibernation, and we're seeing a lot of negative physiological impacts on the animals that are coming out of hibernation now, very thin, nutrient depleted, and really stressed, because they haven't been able to go into a really deep hibernation. So on the animal level, we're seeing the impacts of these prolonged and really weak winters right now.
Well, buildings are horrible for the environment, and that's often part that people tend to overlook that. So I have some stats here. Commercial and industrial buildings contribute to 39% of all greenhouse gases. 35% of all landfill is construction and demolition waste, and these buildings they use 70% of all water use. So that impacts not just climate change, but preserving our landscape and keeping the earth green, I guess you could say. So one thing that's changing is a lot of municipalities, other than Abbotsford and out this way, it's part of their bylaws, they have to build green. For example, in Vancouver, if you want to go through rezoning, you have to build to LEED Gold standards or passive house or other different ones. So green building industry is growing, so everyone join it.
I'm a little bit different in that duckweed's actually a very resilient plant, which is why it actually grows everywhere. There's places in Asia and Thailand and stuff, they actually do grow duckweed outdoors for the same purpose that we're doing, to clean wastewater, and they excel really well over in the tropics. And it's got a wide range of temperatures. It can survive from about 6 degrees Celsius to about 30. So it definitely, in terms of change in temperature, it probably wouldn't impact duckweed all that different. And the fact that we're growing it indoors, so it doesn't really, the weather itself doesn't impact our project per se. But what we're trying to do is help the world in terms of, if there's extreme droughts, we can feed people with the duckweed. If there's water loss, we can help the agricultural sector reuse their water so they don't have to dip into reserves that can be used for human consumption or any other industries or mammals or anything else like that. So if this project works really well, then we can definitely have the opportunity to change the world with this project.
Okay, thank you. What we'd like to do now is open the panel up to the audience to ask some questions, and we're going to use a mic so that everybody can hear you. If you're down at the front, people can hear you behind. So we're going to steal one of the mics here, and we'll open the thing up for questions. John, you're in the building. Oh, okay, at the back. Yeah. So, I'll run around.
Thanks. Ashley, I have a question about duckweed. I've never heard about duckweed before today. Can you explain a little bit about what type of human food products you can create with it? And yeah, just the basics, or draw an analogy to something that we already do consume.
Well, if you ever looked at a wetland or a marsh and see green scum on the top, that's pretty much duckweed, and it's this really small plant with a little root at the bottom, and it multiplies, I think. It can multiply between 16 and 24 hours. It can duplicate its mass. I'm not sure what it does, like how people can consume it. That's more of an Asian area. They eat it. I don't know how we would transform it to people food, but my boss has told me we can consume it. And duckweed's really good at removing nitrogen, ammonia, phosphates, heavy metals. It removes everything from the water. So yeah, that's pretty much what duckweed is.
Is it the smallest flowering plant?
Yes. You can't even see the flower, I don't think.
Yeah, okay. So, that expert, yeah, over the back there.
I think it was just a general topic for the panel. In terms of eco-advocacy, when we're talking about sort of global impact of climate change, is what we're doing in Canada doing anything? Like when we look at the large populations on the planet, India, China, and their sort of approach to eco-advocacy or lack thereof, is what we're doing in Canada impactful at all, or are we kind of just treading water waiting for them to do something?
So Canada has one of the highest per capita GHG emissions on the planet. I think we're number 2, probably after America. And at this point, I don't think what we're doing is doing anything. But Canada does have if we were to follow best practice, I think that what we would be contributing would be not sufficient to stop global warming, but it would have a large impact. But that looks like really big infrastructure investments in sustainable transportation, using more renewable energy, and things that I think are not out of our reach, but not within our will at this point.
Okay, next question. Yes, right behind you is Mike.
Sheena, first of all, I'd just like to say it's really amazing to hear what you're all doing, and then very often it's very closely related to what you study, which is, I think, very lucky and sometimes all too rare. I was very interested in what Sheena said about her work with remote communities in the north and bringing solar to areas that had been formerly mostly powered by diesel. I was very excited to see the report that came out. It was spearheaded by McGill University, and it was called the Report on Climate Change from Canadian Scholars, something like that. And I happily got the link and began tweeting it all around. It's my all-time highest number of retweets. It's way over 100. People really like this, and what the report says is that Canada could have 100% clean electricity by 2030, and 80% or better total energy produced by renewable sources by 2050. So in the process of tweeting this around, I got a couple of times people would hit me up for, oh yeah, well what about the north? They can't use solar, they can't use these technologies. And so I was really interested to hear that you said you're bringing solar to the communities, but the question I would ask is, how much of the energy mix can that take up? How does it work? And what are the other technologies that we could use in remote communities across Canada that would allow them to become more sustainable?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. That's a good question. So currently, right now, we are using solar. So this is just, specific to my high Arctic Beaufort Delta area that I'm familiar with. And we grid tie our systems for the most part. There's very little battery backup, so we actually tie it into the Power Corp grid. They're diesel generators. And the policy right now will allow for any community to install up to 20%. So that may be a community, business, or residential, or combined. Up to 20% of their electrical use can be tied in to the Power Corp grid. Anything not tied into that is not regulated with that policy. Now, solar is working very well up in the Arctic. Although we have months and months of darkness, we have a summer that is all day in sun and a large shoulder season. And a little fact about solar, a lot of people don't know this, is that it actually works better in colder climates than warmer climates. So it's more efficient up there. Now, how the net metering works is that if a hamlet, a town, a resident, or a business puts in a solar system, they can grid tie it. They will produce solar all day in the summer and the shoulder seasons, and nice high levels. We're getting really good production out of it. They may not use that in the night. It will be sold into the grid, and they will be given a credit that will last for the fiscal year, so they can carry that through the winter to help offset their cost. But there is a cap of 20% on that right now. Wind, right now currently in the territory, there's 4 large wind turbines there at Dieback Mine. They are working very well, which is good because it's a little tricky with wind turbines at after -40 for them to produce. but these ones seem to be good. Recently, 2 months ago, I went to a high hill, Storm Hill in Inuvik with the team. We put up a 50-meter wind monitoring site, so we're looking at wind options. Further south in the territory, south of Yellowknife, they're looking at geothermal. But for right now, solar seems to be working. I think we'll easily be able to tap out the 20% in each community with the solar. And we will look forward to expanding into wind as we learn where those sites are and if those sites are accessible to be tied into the grid. Or if the battery backup continues to develop and advance the way it is, there's potential to use that there.
Can I add something to that? Just about the report that you mentioned, I just wanted to point out that while that's an amazing goal for Canada, hydroelectric dams, while renewable, are not considered green power. I don't know if you guys know this, but when you flood the area for the reservoir, the carbon that has a chemical reaction with oxygen in the water, so when the water goes through the turbine, it can create more greenhouse gases than fossil fuels. So just point that out when you hear renewable energy, it's not always good.
Who has another question for their panel here? I have a question for Sheena. What's the impact on permafrost up north?
As in the climate change?
Is there an impact?
Well, I do live on the permafrost. The community where I live, all of our buildings are built above the permafrost on stilts. All of our sewer and water runs through an above ground utility system. And currently, some recent studies I've seen that yes, the permafrost, like even local, my office in Inuvik is in the Western Arctic Research Center, so I get exposure to a lot of scientists traveling through and doing research, and I get to see their presentations. And within our local area, there's a lot of what's called slumping right now, and that is the land masses near rivers and are warming up, and the permafrost is going away, and they're slumping into the rivers and creating problems.
Methane coming off?
There are lots of scientists up there that are looking at that, and I do believe that is true.
Okay. Anybody else have a question out there? To the back.
Alyssa, what are some of the initiatives starting up at UFV in the next little while that'll help us be more sustainable here on campus?
So one of the exciting things that I've been working on ever since I became a sustainability coordinator is incorporating a bigger mixed recycling program. In fact, we don't even have one currently. So you can't actually recycle any plastics or tin foil or anything that most societies recycle at this point. We just had talks with Progressive yesterday, and we'll be bringing hopefully mixed recycling in by early March. So pretty stoked on that. I've also proposed, and I can't guarantee that this is going to actually happen, but I propose that our compost system be streamlined and kind of turned into a closed loop system. Since we have a composter out at CEP, it's my idea that we take all of the compost at Abbotsford, truck it over to CEP, where we can process it in the composter there, and then it can be used by agriculture departments, garden clubs, and also sell back to the community. So not only would that be a more sustainable way to do things, as Progressive, who knows what they do with the compost, but it would also actually be a cost-cutting measure, and then we can fund more programs here. Additionally, we are moving forward with some other energy programs. We just did Sweater Week, so that was a lot of fun. And I think we'll be doing Earth Hour coming up soon, and we have to set a few more. But those are kind of I've really been working on waste and waste diversion, so.
We're in the process of hiring a new energy manager, so that'll be somebody who's going to help us achieve our energy reduction, and part of that has come out of the savings from our meeting our goal. I think have we met our 10% goal? Is that what it was? Yeah. So out of that, we're going to have a new energy manager on board to try to speed it up and whatnot. So I'm just going to ask Alyssa, what out of that garbage on the green, how much could have been recycled or composted?
So when we did our waste audit, we sorted through 364 pounds of garbage, and we found that out of all of that, I think 65% of it could have been composted or recycled. So it's a pretty sad state of affairs at this point, and that's definitely an educational campaign that needs to be rolled out once we have improved the compost and incorporated mixed recycling. We have plans to do that over the summer so that by next fall, we're pretty much going to be set up for new intake and to really make sure that everyone knows how to compost and recycle here.
Okay. Yes.
So I'm going to throw a really tough question at you.
Okay.
Hopefully, this will liven things up a bit. The politicians are fond of saying that we in Canada have to get our resources to market, and you also here get our oil sands bitumen to Tidewater so that it can be sold for export. We know from life cycle analysis that this is a highly carbon intensive and dirty fuel. How do we reconcile these two things? Sometimes the same politician at different times will say, we've got to get our resources to market, and we've got to do climate change, climate action. How do we deal with that? Is it possible? Is it possible?
I would say, I think it's ridiculous that some politicians still want to invest in dirty energy when it's glaringly obvious that we're not going to be using oil in the future, or if we are, it's going to be in very small quantities. It's difficult to say how, we can do sustainable forestry, so those resources will always be there if we manage them properly, but to focus on tar sands and things like that, I think it's just ridiculous, and it's clearly not going anywhere, and there are sustainable resources Canada has that we can tap into. So that's my perspective on it.
But right now, in terms of oil, we're at least at a point where the world doesn't want or need our oil. So that's kind of beneficial at this point. But globally, it's a global embarrassment what's going on with the tar sands. And no one looks at Canada favorably because of that. So unfortunately, they're politicians, and they can talk out of both sides of the mouth at the same time. So that's where they are.
John.
Just to follow up on a comment that was made earlier that Canada can't really make a difference or a significant difference in the global community, and I would beg to differ. That's just a comment. I think that individually we can all make a difference by example, and in our actions too. And that's where my question comes in. So Canada has recently agreed to binding legislation in the future that we're going to be dramatically reducing our carbon contribution per capita in Canada, and we have to start doing that yesterday in order to even potentially meet the targets that we've committed to. You're all involved now in the private sector for the most part, and also not-for-profit sector. What are the things specifically in your fields that you think you personally can do to help us reduce our carbon emissions, apart from maybe not accepting water bottles for drinking on stage? Thank you, Alyssa.
Personally, before I took on this position, I wasn't really ever thinking about waste management and recycling and composting. I thought, yeah, sure, it's good, but it's kind of a small potatoes. So personally, I've been really trying to reduce my waste output lately, insofar as some things that are kind of awkward, like when you ask for no napkin at a restaurant or something like that. And it's just starting off small at this point, but that's something I've been working on. I'm also very passionate about sustainable food systems and buying local. And of course, some things we can't get locally, and some things that we do get from abroad are relatively okay, like bananas. But we're in the Fraser Valley. We have so many places around here that can provide us meat, cheese, vegetables, and so that's something that I like to do within my family, and then cooking at home with those as well. I recently tried making yogurt, so that was pretty cool.
So in terms of affecting the change, my role is less in terms of LEED certification and actually putting numbers on stuff. But one thing that I think that the conservation industry can do is, and it comes down to somewhat ecosystem goods and services, looking at the services that the environment, the intact environment can provide, and monetizing those, as well as monetizing what it costs to put things back, which is often externalized and is never really had a price tag put on it. Not just environmental destruction, but the effects of invasive species, the cost it takes to remove those animals, those plants, all these impacts that we're having on our environment, and monetizing them in a way, not so much, when we monetize them, it tends to come across as, well, why are we spending this much money on this? As opposed to, why are we taking so much for free and then charging ourselves to put it back? So looking at both sides of the equation as opposed to just looking at it as a cost.
I can add something to that. It's mostly all about education. So when I lived in Edmonton, I did the Master Compost Recycler program. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but I'm still really proud of it. 3 years later, it's still on my resume. And so it's just a free course you take at Edmonton. It's 30 hours. They teach you all about waste diversion with City of Edmonton. And one of the things they teach you is how to teach other people about waste diversion, which Alyssa said she's very passionate about. So I personally have worms under my kitchen sink that eat all my food scraps. But that's not realistic for everyone. So it just depends what you can do to be more green. I don't have a car, but maybe, well, it's not realistic at all in Abbotsford to not have a car, but I live in Vancouver. So I'll drive a car so other people don't have to, I'll take transit just so other people don't have to. So it's all making compromise of what's comfortable for you.
Yes.
Would you guys consider nuclear energy green energy or not?
I don't know about nuclear energy. Sorry. Anybody?
I don't know that much about nuclear energy. It's a good question, but I would hope at this point in our history that we can safely make nuclear plants. It's kind of iffy at this point, but if we can prove that these things are safe, then until we can move away from nuclear energy, I'd say it would be preferable to some sources that we use right now, like coal and I guess greener perhaps, but there's definitely risks.
We have another question there. One thing we do, something?
No.
One thing we do here at UFV is we try to have what's called Green Speak seminars, which is kind of part of it. So keep your eye out. One of the things that we try to do in the Center of Sustainability is to modify behavior, and through various speakers that we bring in to talk on various issues. So keep an eye out for, we do them about once a month, to be honest. It's hard to get speakers in on a regular basis. And one of the things we don't have at the University of Fraser Valley is a seminar hour, which most universities have. So we're pretty well tied up in teaching, and we don't have that available hour that some universities do. So there's never a good time, in other words. We've had John in talk and others. So if you have somebody you'd like to have speak at a Green Speak seminar, let me know, and we'll try to bring them in. We're hoping to get Wade Davis in next fall, so we'll see. We're working on that, but he's not available this spring, but he said he might come up in the fall. So sometimes it takes a little while to get our speakers in. So any other questions before we do a wrap up? Yes, way up there.
All of you are addressing climate change in very unique and diverse ways. From a global perspective, what will it look like for humanity to solve climate change, and how likely are we to get there?
I'll start. We can't. That's my quick thing. I just don't think it's possible. The Earth has been a lot warmer in previous millions of years ago. I think we're just in the circle of an ice age, and we're making it go faster by all our actions. We have to slow it down, but it's inevitable, and do what you can to try and slow it down a little more.
I concur.
I opposed.
Have you ever seen those like dystopian kind of novels where everybody, I don't know if you have, but I picture a future where we live in skyscrapers and we all have like hoverboards and stuff like that. And I'm thinking if we all lived in cities and then left the rest of the country, you know, green and forested, but I don't think that's realistic on any point. I just want a hoverboard.
That's a good question, and I don't believe that climate change will be solved, but I do believe what we will be learning about and doing more of is mitigation and adaptation to it.
Yes, go ahead.
Sheena, what's the reason for the 20% cap on grid tie? Is that just politics and protectionism that the power authority doesn't want to have that provided, or is there anything else at play, and can that be addressed so that we could actually use more solar?
Yeah, that's a good question. The Power Corporation of the Northwest Territories is on board for alternative energy. However, you know, these communities are on the generator system, and there's a very high cost to the residents in the north for their electricity. And in order to maintain that system, the Power Corp has to generate a certain amount of revenue to maintain the generators and, you know, the workers and the lines and the grid. And so the number that they've calculated with policymakers and people within our organization is that they're very happy to allow 20% to be, that's at the point, I guess a good way to understand it, that they're not just dumping the diesel in. So it's not affecting the cost to the other people who maybe aren't getting the solar benefit. So it's sort of a policy put in place to protect the cost of the cost from going up to the non-solar user. It allows for some room for development. And because solar and grid tied is sort of new, you know, within the last few years, it's a level where everyone felt is safe to start. And we are hopeful that that will expand. But 20% in a community is quite a lot to get started. There's only one community that I've worked in, Saks Harbor, where I think we're very close to maxing out. So there's a lot of room within the communities to get to that point, and then hopefully we'll go back to the table and look at that number being expanded. But it is sort of protectionism for the other people in the community, and it just keeps the financial line of the Power Corp and the grid running.
Yes.
Just a quick comment. I was surprised to hear your answers to that question about will we get there? Will we be able to address the problem of climate change? I would commend something to you. It's the work of Mark Jacobson at Berkeley. And he was interviewed by the Globe and Mail and said that Canada could be 100% clean energy by 2050. That would do a lot to address the problems that some of you have identified that Canada is underperforming on that plan. Mark Jacobson, he's an engineer from Berkeley. There was an article in the Globe and Mail, and it said, I think the headline was, "Can Canada reach 100% sustainability?" He says we can. He actually has he's done this for every country in the world, or at least for 130 countries in the world. And he's calculated the mix of different forms of alternative energies, alternatives to carbon intensive energies. And for Canada, it's an interesting mix: solar, wind, some small amount of geothermal, but no new hydro. We would use the existing hydro as storage for storage of energy.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah. do we need across Canada supergrid?
Yeah, I actually read that article, and he does make good points. So if Canada works really hard with Justin Trudeau, it could happen. He's pretty innovative. It could happen, but just because Canada is able to do it doesn't mean we're going to stop climate change on the global level. So that's my comment.
Yeah, to add to that, I'd say our consumption habits with things other than energy are also an issue. So, China has got pretty bad climate emissions, and that's mostly due to us in America and our demand for cheap goods. So that's, I think, something that we're going to have to really look at in the next little while if we have any hope of stopping climate change or mitigating it.
Slowing it down.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap it up? Yeah. Yep.
We know that animal product production and consumption is a very greenhouse gas intensive industry. So I was wondering what you guys might consider to be the future in terms of animal product consumption. How might we shift away from animal product consumption, or what does the future look like? I know there's a few institutions looking at in vitro or lab grown meat that requires less calories, but get same amount of calories out in animal product. But I was just curious, if you have something animal product.
I love that you brought that up, because most people don't consider animal products as that. I personally hate meat, it grosses me out, not just because of the whole climate change thing. It's absolutely disgusting to me. So that makes a good point, because I care about the environment deeply, but I care more about preserving our landscape than all the fossil fuel greenhouse gases. So I want to keep the landscape how it is. Like, I study geography, so we went to look at all these great, amazing landscapes, and I want them to still be there. So that's why I do what I do. And with your point, not having all the farms would increase the land that we have on Earth. We could have possibly more people, depending on the trends we're going, probably not. But not eating meat and doing all the non-dairy is a great thing that can do not just for greenhouse gases, but for land use and poverty.
I think that's a good question, and I've read a little bit about in vitro meat. So I think that's definitely, if we can make it taste like real meat, then I think that's fantastic. And it's going to be a low-cost alternative, because I like meat. But I also think less meat consumption is also an alternative option. Our diet is quite a bit. Some of my friends say that they don't feel like they're getting a meal if there's no meat in it, which I think is kind of crazy. But so yeah, I think if we can cut it down and if we can have more sustainable farming methods, then might be viable.
Okay, any other questions here? I think we'll probably wrap it up. We're supposed to finish at 4, I believe, aren't we? And so, first of all, I want a big round of applause for our 5 great I think we'll be available to chat with a little bit maybe afterwards. And so, the whole thing about educating the public and changing behavior is what the Center for Sustainability is about. And, the whole process of science is, I think where scientists have really fallen down, in my opinion, is we're not getting the word out. We're not very good about going out to the public and interacting with the public and saying, look at the hard data. I think we've actually fallen down on that, so we need to do a better job. And also we must convince people that data collection is slow. It takes years and years and years to sort of gather the correct data, and things will change. So there's always criticism of scientists, changes from year to year. Well, that's true, you get new data. And, but I think the important thing also is to keep yourself very well informed and not let, you can get news off the television, but be willing to kind of challenge what you hear on television and do some investigations. So, I do have one final thought. One of the biggest challenges I see coming down is food security. I just read, there's a website called Inside Climate Change. It's a nonprofit. And they said by 2040, I believe, there'll probably be a 15% food reduction due to climate change. and that'll jack up the prices by 30% on food. And mostly who will be impacted are the poor nations, the bigger nations, or the wealthier nations will probably survive it better. And you know, we have 7 billion people in the world, of which the snowfields in Asia are disappearing very rapidly. It definitely is going to impact the rice production in Asia, and how are we going to feed those people? So it's a huge issue about food security coming down the road, I feel, and we need to be thinking about how we're going to solve that issue. I don't have any answers, but I think it's going to impact globally the whole world, so we need to be thinking about how climate change is going to impact food security. And so without further ado, I think I'm done. I'm going to turn it back over to
Yep.
Yeah.
Sorry, the tricky one.
Yeah, the tricky one. Sorry.
Well, I think Pat just figured out our next topic for a good speaker panel next fall, food security. I just want to thank everybody for coming. It was really interesting to hear you guys' different perspectives on some of those topics. I hope you guys got something out of this as well. If you have somebody that you think might be interested in these topics, this will be posted on YouTube. Our next speakers panel is actually March 3rd on our Chilliwack campus, and it's actually going to be on addictions and how they affect the community. We have some local addiction counselors, and we will have some physiologists talking about how addiction actually affects people and things like that. So it should be a really interesting topic. That's on March 3rd at 5:30 p.m. So it's an evening class on the Chilliwack campus. It's March 2nd. I was going to be like 24 hours late. March 2nd on the Chilliwack campus. So that should be a really interesting topic. A lot of really good panel speakers for that one. So we have gifts for all of you guys. So thank you so much for your time. There are some refreshments outside, right outside this building. So if you guys do want to network and talk and chat, ask more questions, and feel free to do that. And other than that, we'll just big round of applause for all of our people.